A lot of people like the idea of becoming a property investor, owning multiple houses and waiting for the rent to roll in. So they buy their first property, but only then discover a laundry list of gotchas that no one ever told them. And uncovering these hidden surprises, it really does matter, because they could change either how you invest and maybe whether you invest at all. So in this video, we're going to count down the top 7 things I wish someone told me before I started investing in property. And then once we've revealed the truths behind the hype, then you can finally start investing with your eyes wide open, or decide if property investing is even right for you. Now, I still remember my first property investment seminar vividly. The guy at the front talked about how property could outperform shares and other types of investments because of this one little word: leverage. And I get why property people like to talk about it, including me, because if you buy a house for, call it $500,000, you put in $100,000 as a deposit, a fifth of the money, and let's say you borrow the rest. Then what happens if the property doubles in value over the next 15 years, which has happened plenty of times in New Zealand? Well, your property is now worth $1 million and you've made $500K in capital gains. But here's the thing. You only put in $100,000 of your own money. So you haven't doubled your money. It's not a 100% return. It's a 500% return on the money that you put in. Now, how does that work? Well, if you put in a fifth of the money as a deposit for a property, you then get 5 times the market return. So if the market goes up by 100%, you get a 500% return. If it goes up by 20%, you get a 100% return on the money you put in. That is the mortgage magnifier effect, where mortgages make your returns bigger. But here's what nobody tells you. It works both ways. And the mortgage magnifier, that can make your losses bigger too. So let's flip the story. Let's say you buy that $500,000 property, you put in a fifth of the money, 100K as that deposit. The market now drops by 20%. Your property is now worth $400,000, but you've still got that $400,000 mortgage. The bank doesn't decide to give you a break just because the value of your house dropped. So the market dropped by 20%, but you put in a fifth of the money, so you get 5 times the market loss. That's why in this example, 100% of your deposit, 100% of your money is gone, at least on paper. And this isn't hypothetical, right? If you were a first-time buyer, let's say you bought in Lower Hutt at the end of 2021, you could have seen your house price fall by over 30% in just a couple of years. Now, let's say you put in a 10% deposit, a tenth of the money. That means you get 10 times the market return. And if the market dropped by 30%, then you made a negative 300% return and probably now owe the bank more than your property is worth. I just don't think that the property investment industry talks about this enough. And you really do need to know that this can happen in the short term. And by the way, if you want to avoid all of these I didn't know that moments, that's kind of the whole point of working with my company Opus, because when you use the Opus Wealth pathway, you get a financial advisor, a property manager, a mortgage advisor, all in your corner who will help you learn all this stuff before you learn it the hard way. And if you want to see how that works, I'll drop a link down in the description so you can book a free meeting. But remember, even though property and prices, they tend to go up over the long term, you only get that long-term growth if you can hold on to that property. And that's where you need to know how often you get paid your rent. Because let's say you use a property manager. You'd think the cash flow is pretty simple, right? Your tenant pays the rent every week, maybe fortnight. Your property manager collects it, they pay it to you. Easy. Not quite that simple. Because you see, most property managers don't pay you every fortnight, they pay you twice a month. Now, that sounds like it's the same thing, but it's really not. Because there are 26 fortnights in a year, but property managers only pay you 24 times. So let's say you've set up an automatic payment to come out of your bank account every 2 weeks to cover your mortgage. The rent might not actually be there yet. And this is where it gets even more complicated, because property managers typically pay you out your rent on the 1st and the 16th of the month. Sounds simple, but good property managers use what's called a trust account. So the rent from your tenants, that goes into a special trust account. It doesn't directly go to the property manager's normal company bank account. So they can't dip in and use that rent most of the time for their own business use. Now, this is there to protect property investors, but because it's a special trust account, it needs to be manually updated every day, and so someone has to be in the office to process your rental payment, which is why typically property managers won't pay you on weekends or public holidays. So even if your tenant paid their rent, it's in the property manager's trust account on the 1st of January, because that's a public holiday and there are a couple in January, you might not see that money until the 3rd or the 4th once all of those public holidays are over. And this is a small detail, but it catches out a lot of first-time investors, because if you planned for the rent to come in on the 1st of the month and then pay the mortgage that same day, you might find you've got to put in some of your own money to cover any shortfall, which is why some landlords set up their mortgage payment to go out on, say, the 6th of January or the 6th of the month, for example, just so the rent is more likely to be in there. But sticking along the same lines as rent, the third thing that frustrates landlords is when your tenant moves out, you walk through the property and there are a couple of marks on the walls, some damage here and there. And you think, no problem, I'm just going to use the tenant's bond to fix the issue. That's the whole reason I took the bond in the first place. And then you later find out that you can't just take money out of the tenant's bond, because under New Zealand's tenancy law, tenants aren't responsible for fair wear and tear of the property, which basically means that your tenant lives in the property and over time, some stuff is going to wear out. The carpet gets a bit frayed, there's a mark on the wall, the door handle gets a little bit loose. And when the tenant moves out, the property doesn't have to look exactly like it did the day they moved in. And if you take the tenant to the tenancy tribunal, you might find out that the damage that you're complaining about, the damage that you want fixed, it's not classified as damage, it's just fair wear and tear. And actually the tenant might not have to pay you a cent at all, because some of that damage is just expected. And this frustrates a lot of landlords, because how are you supposed to know what counts as fair wear and tear and what's legitimate damage? Now, here's a simple rule of thumb that property managers often use. If a mark on the wall is larger than a $2 coin, that's probably not fair wear and tear. That's probably legitimate damage. You might have a claim. If it's smaller than that $2 coin, it probably counts as fair wear and tear. You're unlikely to get anything or be able to take money out of the tenant's bond. Now, let's say it's a small mark on the wall, as we said, fair wear and tear. If it's the curtains coming away from the railing, like I saw in one property, not fair wear and tear, legitimate damage, you could probably have a claim. Little bit of paint coming off the wall in a high-use hallway, fair wear and tear. An ugly hack job, paint job in the garage, not fair wear and tear. And the point is that not every little bit of damage at the end of a tenancy is going to be covered by the bond, and you need to know that going in. And if you're learning something from this video, make sure you hit the like button, because that is how I know which videos to make more of. And honestly, it just helps with the YouTube algorithm. Subscribing, that helps too. We are so close to hitting our goal of growing this community to 50,000 subscribers. And if you do already subscribe, you'll know that if there's one thing that will always change with property, it is the tax rules, which is something that property accountants don't always tell you up front. They just assume you know. And when the government decides to change the tax system, it can completely dilute your investment returns. I want you to cast your mind back to March 2021. That's when Jacinda Ardern's Labor government brought in the interest deductibility rules. Now, people didn't, and they still don't realise how massive these rules were, because it didn't actually change property investors' tax rates, but it did change how your profit was calculated. Now, here's how it usually works. Let's say you had a rental property earning $30,000 a year in rent, and you're paying $10,000 in costs. That's for your rates, your maintenance, your insurance, and you're also paying $20,000 a year to the bank in mortgage interest. Now, in this case, you've got $30,000 worth of rent, $30,000 in costs, you're breaking even, you're not making a profit, no tax. But under the interest deductibility rules, that $20,000 in interest doesn't count anymore in the calculation. Even though you've still got to pay the bank $20,000 in interest, the IRD now looks at your books and says, you're making a $20,000 profit. And that means that you now owe them $6,500 in tax on a property that was actually breaking even. So your property went from cash flow neutral to costing you money, not because anything changed about the property or the market. It's just because the tax rules changed. How they calculated your profit changed, which meant you paid more tax. Now, the 2026 election in New Zealand has just been called for November later this year, and you can bet that there will be more discussion about property investors and taxes. And if you're investing for 10, 15, 20 years, you're gonna go through multiple governments. Some will be pro-investor, some won't be. So there is a risk that the tax rules could change while you're investing, and that could impact your property's value and even how long it's going to take you to resell it. But not everything on this list is all doom and gloom. Because one thing I've seen in investing that I wish someone told me in advance is that some investors buy properties without ever stepping foot inside them. A friend of mine actually bought his first property without even walking in. I said to him, mate, let's go look at some properties tomorrow. It was a bunch of townhouses. We walked into one. He thought, yeah, this looks okay. We went back to the office and he ended up signing a contract for it. Now, here's the thing. That townhouse that he walked into, it wasn't actually the one he ended up buying. And I know for about 2 or 3 years, he never actually stepped foot inside it. Now, I know for him, it sounded and felt really strange at the time. And it wasn't until a few years later that both he and I realized that that is way more normal than you'd think. I've actually got another mate. He bought a property in Auckland while he was living in Christchurch. And even to this day, he's never been inside it. And he doesn't want to. For him, it's just an investment. He doesn't need to see the physical building. He hires a property manager, uses building inspectors when he needs to, and manages it all from a distance. Now, nobody really tells you that that is a valid way to invest. If you care more about the property as an investment, the numbers and the returns, well, you don't need to emotionally attach yourself to the building. But even if that's how you decide to invest, I don't think anyone really prepares you for number 6 on our list, which is that property investing is and can be a real slog. It can be tough going. Let me show you what I mean. Like, let's say you invested it in Gisborne back in 2007, because house prices have been going up a lot at that point. For the next 11 years, property prices broadly stayed pretty flat. They barely budged. Now, to be fair, after that, they skyrocketed. If you'd invested there, you would have made a lot of money. And when you look back on this graph though, those 11 years, it looks like a short blip. And that boom, it can feel inevitable in hindsight. But when you're living through those 11 years, not knowing when or even if house prices will ever go up again, it sucks. It's month after month of news headlines saying that property prices aren't going anywhere. It's month after month of wondering if you made a bad investment decision, and year after year of feeling stuck. And I don't think we talk enough about how frustrating that is when you are going through it. Now, if you've invested in property for the last 30 years, you've gone through some hard times, you've been through some good times too. And it's easy to look back and say, oh, you know what, it wasn't that bad. But it's harder when you're going through it. And it's different from like shares, because with shares, the prices move every day. Some days you're going to feel great, even when share prices have been down for a while. If you have a couple of days where they go up, they can just lift your spirits a little bit. You don't get that same buzz with property because you only get data out kind of once a month. The highs are slower and the lows, they do tend to drag. But even after all that, the mortgage magnifier working against you, the cash flow headaches, the wear and tear of your property, the changing taxes, the emotional slog, even after all of that, I don't think that enough people remind you that investing in property can still be worth it, because that same mortgage magnifier that can hurt you, it can also create serious wealth. You know, I've bought properties where I borrowed the deposit from the bank using the no cash needed method, like I talk about in this video. I didn't put in any of my own cash, and if that property goes up by $100K, $100,000, well, I've created $100,000 of equity from essentially nothing, all borrowed money. Now, I'm not going to tell you that it's all sunshine and rainbows, right? There are real risks, and I've just spent this whole video telling you about them. But if you can get through the slog, if you understand the downsides going in, if you've got your eyes wide open, those risks come with the potential for some pretty significant rewards that could change your life. And remember, if you want to take the first step on the Opus Wealth pathway, click the link in the description to book your free meeting. But before you start on that journey, one of the main questions you might have is, well, how do I go from one house to buying 5 more? And that's exactly what you'll learn in this video, including how I did it before the age of 35. Click the video on your screen and I'll see you in the next one.